and welcome to episode 50 of Delightful Dissent. And today, on this kind of celebratory landmark episode, I'm joined by Rachel Butt, creator and facilitator. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you, Matthew.
And today's assumption is that I need to help. I think this is a really good one, and a really good one for a particular kind of landmark episode. And I'm sure there are lots of times I've tried to help and made things worse. And I'm also pretty sure that it's the same with others helping me. And I've had plenty of times where I'm like, I don't need that. It's not helping. It really does make me wonder if helping is always a good thing and always the right thing to do. So this is also a rescheduled event. So thank you very much if you've joined us now and you had planned to join us before. Thank you for being flexible. So yeah. If you're new to Delightful Dissent, this idea really came up from my work talking to people who are taking these pioneering, different and divergent approaches to big, complex, messy things. And Rachel is very much one of these people. And when I found when I'm talking to people, is that they often hit upon these hidden barriers, these implicit beliefs, these stuff that was never really said out loud, but kind of existed underneath, these deep assumptions. And so I really wanted to challenge some of those, bring them to the surface and see how true they were, and really actually have a conversation about them. So I hope this show gives you some specific ideas about the kind of assumptions you can challenge in your personal and professional life and things that will serve you. But more importantly, we'll give you ideas about how you can go and challenge the assumptions that you want to yourself. Because I'd like everyone to be able to do this. I think it's a really important thing for everyone. And I'd like it to just be a part of everyday life. And the show is Delightful Dissent because, we are saying, okay, we disagree. It's not quite the same. But it's not about winning. It's not about proving ourselves right at everyone else's expense. It's about having some fun and seeing if there's a more joyful and expansive way of understanding and relating to things. And the show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any technical issues or any interruptions or anything. And do be aware that we may talk about challenging and personal topics in this show, particularly around kind of burnout and perhaps around intergenerational issues. And there may also be strong language. So if any of those are an issue for you, then just please be warned that that might be a possibility. There aren't any perfect answers here. This is about asking questions, exploring, asking questions of yourself and asking questions of us. If you're watching live, if you comment, we can bring that in. So please do ask any questions you have to us live. If you're listening to the recording or watching the recording, then you can get in touch with us with the details that we'll share at the end to ask any questions that you have then. So, I first met Rachel a few years ago now, and I must admit I've kind of been trying to get her on the show ever since I started doing it. So it seems fitting that she's just here finally on this 50th kind of episode. I think it's really worked out really well. So I find conversations with Rachel both kind of simultaneously grounding and liberating, and I think it's a really lovely combination. And I hope that you in the audience find this conversation that way too. So Rachel, could I ask you to just describe your work and a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matthew. Well, my heart is beating. What an introduction. I feel very excited about the world, and your work and this kind of topic. Not just this topic, but the very act of looking at things more deeply and taking time to do that and to reflect and see where our own views, where society's views have come from and whether they really work, whether they really bring us well-being. I know that word is kind of overused, but I think that's what I've always been interested in really since I was a little bean, like wondering, well, how we're on this planet together, how can we take care of each other? How can we be well together? I don't think I kind of got into meditation later on, but it was never really to escape this reality and go to another one, but just to really look at how we can do better, because I think I was always in touch with the suffering of the world and around me, in my own family at that time growing up. There was things going on, and so that kind of led me on a little pathway. I started out as a musician, and I'm still a musician. I just couldn't leave my first love, music and sound. But then when I was about 21, I was kind of like having a great time. I was a drummer in a punk band, and but I really felt I wasn't really directly kind of making a difference in society, and maybe I was actually, and I couldn't see it. But at that time, it led me into voluntary work, doing advocacy with asylum seekers. And so, long story short, I ended up working in the kind of charity legal sector, bringing the use of law and human rights to the advocacy frontline sector, and then burning out through that, really, because I was so angry actually at what I saw, the suffering I saw every day and the injustice. And then I had about 5 years of just kind of quietly contemplating everything like that had happened in my own life and in that field, and spent a lot of time in a monastery which was set up by Thich Nhat Hanh, the kind of peace activist, Zen master, in France. And then that led me to doing the work that I do now, which is really looking at what do I do? It's a good question, but it's really trying to hold space with it for these things where we kind of look at what's driving us, and then we look at the energy behind our action, and we can kind of decide whether that's going to drag us into burnout, whether it's going to drag us out of alignment, or whether we actually need to take care of our energy. And I kind of work with yoga and sound meditation to help us to relax and renew, and then align action that really is going to help us and the world, instead of being kind of trauma response to the suffering that we see.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I also, I must admit, I didn't realize you're another drummer. It's a bit of a theme on the show.
Is it?
It might be there might be some selection bias stuff going on. Like drummers that do the work with, that then find work doing like supporting other people seems to be a theme, but can't think why.
You like hitting things, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I do think there's something kind of facilitative about drumming as in a role in the band. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into that. I love the idea of that work around advocacy, and obviously I on the show before I shared my own experiences around burnout and kind of helping and what it means to do this. And I think it's such an important thing, particularly for those of us who are led to working with difficult things and wanting to help others in our professional lives, because some people find that it suits them to separate the two, and to have a job and then to have a person to do personally fulfilling things separately. I've never been able to work that way. Which has its advantages, but also has its disadvantages. And I think one of them is this over helping, and this you can't ever get away from it, so it can be very difficult. And so I really looking forward to kind of exploring this a little bit more. But before we do, have you got a quote that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I do, Matthew. I've had to write it. I've written it down. This is a chap that I must admit I don't know him very well. I think I've seen his beaming face, on Google. Just, as I say, he's kind of hanging out in the ultimate dimension. But Ramana Maharshi, so he said apparently he was once asked, how should we treat others? And he replied, there are no others. So that's the quote that I've chosen, just to kind of confuse everyone, really. No, it's that I said there's many other quotes that are very practical and they're very instantly attainable what they mean. But I think what's beautiful about this is it's a really deep contemplation that can lead us to our own insights within,
So what is it that how do you relate to that? If I can kind of ask something so difficult.
Yeah.
How does it relate for you? What made you want to share that in this
Yeah.
today?
I think, yeah, there's many layers, and to this topic as well. I think my first misperception really was that in my own life of over giving to the point where I wasn't well anymore, was that yeah, I didn't include myself in this compassion, in this process. It was like there's suffering out there and I need to fix it. Basically, I need to meet it. And I wasn't really in touch with my own. And then when I look at this quote, I think I said to you before before we started that one other way to look at it is, because of my training and being a student of kind of the Zen approach to Buddhism, is that the teaching was pointing to there is no separate self. There is no separate permanent self. So how can there be any others if we ourselves are also not this permanent fixture? And it just helps me to be more holistic. I think that it's not that there is an I and that there's a separate external thing that needs to be met and fixed, and it's actually like we're just kind of like events coming together, and I need to include myself, my own feelings, my own limitations, my body, my the organism that I am, within anything I do for others, and really check in, like, but does this body have the energy to do it? Am I being driven by a fear or a rescue mode? And actually to include that with any interaction with the other. So I don't know if that makes sense, but these are some of my own contemplations on this subject.
Yeah, as you speak, it really makes me think about that relationship with, why we feel led to help. Where that is coming from.
Yes.
What we are doing for ourselves in helping. What need we are meeting in ourselves. And being aware of that. Not necessarily that it needs to be, I think one of the interesting ideas is there's this idea of kind of completely selfless helping. Doesn't really make sense on some level, because we are, we are, I always work with this kind of both and. We are the individuated physiological, like, material being, and the, and the connected infinite at the same time. And it's about the negotiation between those two aspects, rather than the, like, okay, I'm all one of these things and I'm just out for myself, or I am this completely kind of interdimensional, transcendental, cosmic thing, and both of those are true. And it feels like it's a very difficult thing to negotiate, but being with that sense of, like, why am I led to help in this way? What is it? And what is it that I'm offering in all senses? Like, why am I well placed? Do I have the resources? Do I have what am I offering? And I think that's a really, really important part of it. So yeah, thank you. So the assumption we're going to be looking at is this assumption: I need to help. I have to help. When we say help, it's a word that's used. It's one of those. I think it might be in the top 1,000 words in English. It's a really commonly used word.
Is it?
But I think it's a very interesting one as well. So, what do we mean when we say help? How do you relate to the word help?
Well, as you're speaking, I'm just seeing like someone that's stranded on an island. Like I'm just seeing like Wilson. Help! That's what's coming to my mind. I don't know if it's relevant, but yeah, I mean, it's all. But that is it, isn't it? I think when the helping can not be so helpful is when we view the person that needs our help as this helpless kind of victim, that without us, they're not going to get off the island, like they're not going to survive. And I don't know, this is just my experience, and I guess going into that kind of hero mode of, like, I've got to save this person, or this issue's got to be fixed by me, you know, alone. And it's kind of, I think this kind of over identifying with the self in relation to this kind of helping and fixing is part of the problem and the tension that was for me anyway. That, so I think, but then when you look at it in terms of, as you've just described, like, you know, I've got 2 bananas and I only want one, and someone is hungry and they might want one, they can have one of my bananas, and that's a beautiful thing to offer, you know, because the resource is there, they have a need, they'll be fine without that banana, but maybe they want it and I don't need it. So I think there's different levels, but the way that we view what we're offering and how the other's receiving or needs it, I think plays a big part in how it's going to go for all parties, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a really big thing in this around responsibility. And when I say responsibility, again, commonly repeated on the show, I mean the ability to respond.
Yeah.
Separate from blame, which is one of the other things, but the ability to respond. And I suspect, certainly in my own experience of burning out, is by taking on stuff that literally wasn't within my domain to respond to, it became exhausting.
Yes.
Because it was just, or it was right at the edge of my domain to respond to. So it took a huge amount of effort, and I had to kind of push to change anything at any point. And it just wasn't a very useful deployment of my resources. It didn't help anyone very much, actually. And I think for me, that was one of the really difficult things, is, you know, that's this needing to help can lead to us not helping anyone.
True.
I also think it's, you know, there's I forget who tells the story of the, you know, the metaphor of like, if you see someone drowning and you're not a strong swimmer, the worst thing you can do for them is jump in and try and then start drowning next to them.
It's true. But why do we jump in then? Why do we jump in?
Yeah.
Because we want to help. Yeah. Because I think there's, as I say, there's different levels. I think there is a human, and it's a beautiful thing that exists, I'm sure, in everyone, that we care about each other. Like we don't want people to be suffering, and we might see that, you know, we can have a positive impact on that, and we would welcome support as well. But I think there is a kind of natural, because we are ultimately connected, and there is that feeling. So it's honoring that as well, and it's like having reverence for that, and that is a beautiful human quality. But like you say, we have to have that check-in of like, actually, but I can't swim, so maybe the best thing I can do to help is to call someone who can, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that understanding of ourselves in the context, and, you know, why am I led to do this?
Yes.
And therefore, is this the right approach?
Yeah.
You know, is this what I think is actually going to satisfy that best, given everything?
And that takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does. And I think the other part of this is, you know, when we're in that help situation, we're often in that situation where it can feel very urgent.
Oh yeah.
It might be very urgent, but it definitely feels very urgent.
Crisis.
That crisis, exactly. And I think that, you know, the self-awareness, we're never going to be able to sit and pick through all of that for the very first time in a crisis.
True.
And I think that's one of the other reasons, you know, this idea of kind of cultivating these practices, these things we do that don't have a point, is that actually they provide us with a practiced way of responding, and things we're ready to use and we're comfortable using that we wouldn't otherwise be.
Exactly. In the moment, it's like a muscle, you know, building the muscle. One of my friends says it's like you collect the firewood, you know, before winter, but then when it's cold, you use the firewood to heat the house, you know. And it's yeah, these practices, this holistic approach to life, actually, you know, for me anyway, I think it's saved my life, or it's certainly guided my life as it is now. And it just gives, I mean, I'm just a beginner really in many ways, and it's just gives that space though, doesn't it? It's just the space around what's happening. I think I shared with you something that resonated with me from a Dharma teacher that I love, who I call LA Monk, because he's from LA. I can't say his Vietnamese name very well, so that's what I call him. And but he's a very funny man, and he delivers things, you know, quite directly. But he said once, and I was in the audience, he said that we're just a bag of views, habits and wounds. That's what the kind of the self is. And I think doing any awareness practice and being in the body and with the breath, and you can see what those views and habits and wounds are, and you can start to put a question mark over whether they're really helping you or needed in that moment, you know. And it's, but like you say, we have to do that practice before the crisis hits. Otherwise we're just like a pinball, really. We're just like unconsciously reacting to external events, you know, ping pong, without any space, or I don't want to say control, because we're not in control, but there's a rudder, you know, that we can guide, I think, with these practices.
Influence, I think, is the word I tend to use. Is we want influence. It's influence, not control, in these kind of things. But influence is definitely a good thing. The other thing about control is it's constraining about all outcomes. You know, it's like it limits good outcomes and bad outcomes. At the same time, it's a narrowing. True. Whereas influence leaves the possibility of undesired outcomes, but it creates the much more likelihood of much more desired ones. So yeah, I think it's and perhaps the helping and control is one of these things. It's like if I'm helping because I need you to be not like that.
Exactly.
Because I have something that in me that is so deeply troubled that I must see your state be different.
Yes.
I need to control that. You know, my helping isn't coming from a place of influence. It's not coming from something I can give freely. It's coming from something where I need you to be different, actually. Which doesn't sound healthy when I say it that way.
It's not. It's very unhealthy. But I think it's what I see is like there's a book by Eric Fromm that I still haven't finished reading, actually, but it's a cracking book, The Sane Society. And it's just very simple, that vision of like the society, the mainstream society that we live in isn't well, you know, and we weren't taught how to be human, actually. You know, we're in a capitalist exploitative kind of model of, and another teacher I love talks about America as like, it's not a country, it's a company, you know. And it's like we're raised in this way, and it's no one's fault, but we do have the power to unpick it, or at least to be on the path of unpicking it slowly and joyfully, as you say, without blame, but just choosing, okay, where do I want to put my time and energy on this in this moment on this planet, you know. And I think for me, I mean, you just get the message that you're meant to be happy all the time, you know, and you're meant to be well, and you're meant to be, but it's not a true happiness or a true well-being. It's just a kind of tick box, or a kind of there isn't space to be sad, to be lost, to be hurting. And I think that to die, you know, we can't even face death, I think, as a society. We're so afraid of all of these uncomfortable truths, in a way. And so there is one thing that we don't want people to suffer, and we want to help them, but there's also this other awareness that grows, I think, more and more, that actually life is painful, you know, and we have to suffer, like, and we have to be able to sit in that fire, you know. And that was something for sure I couldn't do. I couldn't just sit in it. I was always acting, you know. I was trying to act my way into a better situation, or fix that thing. And as I shared with you before, the first clinical supervision I ever had for my advocacy work, after maybe 7 years of doing it without it, which was obviously a time bomb, was kind of like, can you sit in discomfort? And I realized, no, I don't know how to, and that's when I started to learn how to do that.
It's not something we're invited to do very often, and particularly if I think this is an interesting thing, if we've been surrounded by people who have that need to help us, who aren't comfortable with our suffering, we're never going to get the opportunity to be with and resolve our own suffering.
True.
Or and I think for me, I've talked on the show before about this idea of affect as information. The importance of our emotional experience in informing our behavior. And it's like, yes, these are undesirable emotions or aversive emotions. They're the emotions that we find unpleasant because they tell us that things aren't ideal in our environment. But they inform our response to that difficulty. And if we can't sit with them, we go into quite rote responses. Whereas by sitting with them, we get a much more proportionate and subtly, an appropriate response. And I think for me, that's a really important one, because whichever thing we can't feel, is then we're not being guided by that.
By that truth of
by that aspect of the experience.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of it is, we have a linguistic habit of dividing experiences up into these, like, essentially good or bad.
Good and bad.
And it's like, well, nothing's all good, nothing's all bad. Sitting with the unpleasant stuff yields some really wonderful things. The example I often use is grief, which is an incredibly hard thing to sit with. But by renegotiating our stories in the basis of our, to integrate the experience of having lost something, we open up we essentially liberate ourselves from all of the constraints that brought in as well. And so we find something the other side of it. Things like anger protects us from, it protects us from violation, and it's a response to a thing. And without those, we can't fully be with them. And I'm not sure we can work very safely, is a difficult word, but we can't know when our actions are helpful or harmful for ourselves or others if we can't be monitoring, be aware of the feedback.
Exactly. But we have to want to know if it's helping ourselves and others. So I think that's one level of kind of awakening, isn't it? That, to know, oh, maybe what I'm doing isn't right for me and the other. And before it was just an unconscious, action, an unconscious response. And then wanting to see if it's really helping you or the other. And then, like you say, learning how to navigate that by sitting in discomfort, by being with emotions. I mean, I'm learning that I'm still finding it very hard to sit with difficult emotions. I bought a book from Thich Nhat Hanh. It was at the beginning of my journey with his teachings, but that was called The Art of Suffering. I already love the title because it's just saying, like, suffering exists and there's just an art to it. And if we know how to suffer, we can suffer well, and it can inform our life, like you say. And his kind of view is, the lotus grows out of the mud. It's like the beauty, the joy, the insight is in the suffering, and we just have to be with it to see that. But I notice in myself there's a resistance to being with the suffering, and that's like a habit energy of mine. So that's another layer to unpick. Why can't I just be with it? But then you have to learn and be very patient with oneself, because there's a reason for that as well.
I think that the reason, because it feels like, from this perspective, I think there are a couple of reasons why it feels so uncomfortable to do that, why we learn. And one of them is blame. One of them is this idea of, like, it's interesting, responsibility and blame are basically conflated in language. They basically often used to mean fundamentally the same thing, when actually I don't think they would. It's like, not to blame, but I can do something about it. And it feels like we have a cultural assumption that if we do something about it, it's because we are to blame. And it's almost an admission of guilt, of failure. But that stops us moving forward.
Interesting. You're opening my mind, Matthew, to new portals. So you're saying that then people don't take responsibility because they don't want to be blamed? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, I think it probably goes both ways, actually. And there's a kind of comfort in blame.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
like, it's like if we can blame other people, then we don't have to do something. We don't have to engage with it.
Yes.
And it keeps us kind of safe on some level. There's that kind of, it keeps things how they are. It's a very consistent, it's like, and I think there's in helping, when we're talking about helping, I've had the sense, certainly in the past, that where I've had difficulty with things, that I've had the sense that for some of those things I should not have that difficulty. I am at fault for finding this difficult. There is blame there, and that blame hasn't always accrued to me. So, for example, with a lot of neurodiversity, a lot of neurominorities, the standing explanation for most of the last 100 years has blamed parenting, particularly mothering. And there's no evidence for that. It was entirely prejudice. But that's so that it's like it's that there has to be blame.
I see. It's always someone's fault and it's not mine.
Yeah. And so someone has to be at fault.
Right.
When things aren't right, perfect, ideal,
right,
whatever. When someone needs help.
Oh dear. Yes, I see. But I mean, again, this is what I mean about no self, no other. Because, I mean, bless us. I just want to give everyone a big hug, because the world is a beautiful place, but we are dealing with a lot of SH1T, aren't we? Because it's not just, it's from the top down, isn't it? It's cultural. It's like, it's what governments do. They're doing it now to such a degree that it's so obvious. It's almost like funny, but it's just not funny because it's really awful. But kind of just blame. Yeah, it's just blaming. Let's just blame this group so that everyone can now hate them.
Yep.
So we don't have to do anything about the reality that's unfolding. And it makes me angry. There is a lot of anger and fire around that. How can we live in this world, where these kind of, this culture is allowed to play out again and again and again, because it's so destructive, and it's very demeaning to our human potential, isn't it? Because it's just so low. It's like, but we do have the capacity to listen to each other, to cooperate, to love ourselves and others, and to create beautiful things together. I really feel that alive in me and in the world. But yet, the power structures that we're in, the culture, the mainstream is not operating in that, wonderland. It's operating in like fear, blame, separation, competition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important point that, these, when we build institutions, technology, our ideas, our ways of doing things, they have these things embedded in them.
Yeah.
And this is part of the reason to do the show, is because if we surface these, we can call them out. You can say, this is in this practice. And it's not to say that that's always wrong. It's just to say that, is it true for what we're talking about? And I think, when we kind of come up with these universal ways of approaching things, and these so many stereotypes and the kind of ways of relating that are so inflexible, they require so much to be true that they're actually quite unlikely to be accurate very often, because they're making so many assumptions. They're kind of and I think that's one of the really big difficulties when we end up systematizing them, making them really big systems, is then the work becomes challenging the way the system works at least as much as the individual situation. And I think that's also one of the reasons that it can be discouraged, let me put it that way, because there are people who have a vested interest in the way that the system works, who have power in that system, and who are afraid of seeing it change.
Yes, of course. I want to give them a big hug as well.
Absolutely. I think that's I thank you, because that is such an important point.
Yeah.
Is that it's the, if we're all connected, the pain and the suffering is all connected as well, right? And we kind of forget that.
Yeah. What suffering must the people be who are so focused on that control? We've talked about control before, haven't we? It's a tension, isn't it? It's a kind of, it's a tension. And I think, I mean, I'm more the other way, and I have to try to have some respect for the material world, because again, I think the Buddhist teachings speak to my heart. There's something about it that just makes sense for me. And there's this, parable where that there's some farmer, and he comes running past the Buddha and his disciples, and he's like, "Oh, have you seen my cows? I've lost my cows." And they said, "Oh, no," basically, "I've gone that way." And then the Buddha says to his disciples afterwards, "See, you're lucky because you haven't got any cows." And it's like, I really feel that. I mean, I'm like, these people with all this power, with all these things that they have to hold on to and control. I mean, it's a suffering. It's a huge, huge suffering. It's not actually a place I would like to be, So but then it's just, how can we both accept it, have compassion for people in power, and feel the suffering that they must be in, but also move towards change, but without killing ourselves or without trying to be right, because that's going to burn us out again. But there must be a way to move forwards together, holding all of this, in a big cuddle.
Absolutely. And I think for me, you touched on something that I'm really interested in as well. And for me, I've drawn a huge amount of comfort and all sorts of things from the Buddhist tradition, from the Taoist tradition, but particularly from yoga traditions rooted in classical tantra, and they're much more embodied. And I think that's partly why. And they're also rooted in sensory, a lot of them are rooted in sensory pleasure, as is Sufism. And I really like that idea of that being part of the process, because I think when we're talking about helping, it all feels very, it's that selfless suffer. It's almost like taking on your suffering, taking your suffering from you and suffering myself.
Yeah.
Whereas instead thinking about it as this kind of, okay, how can I help in a way that I enjoy?
Yes.
How can we find pleasure in this? Probably mutual pleasure in this, rather than being like, there's all this suffering and we just have to suffer it, rather than, and it feels much more. And I think the music thing connects here for me, because a lot of it is that sensory stuff, that the stuff that gets us into our body, whatever it is. Music works incredibly well for me personally, but there are lots of other ways to do it. And anything that gets us to enjoy that, we kind of learn then that the stuff in our body isn't to be afraid, to be resisted and afraid and scared of in quite the same way. And I think that experiencing that is such a helpful way to do it.
Yeah, we have to experience it, because we can talk, for hours clearly about this subject.
I think we have.
yeah, we have. But that's what I'm interested in as well, really. It's the work that I do for myself too, is just facilitate an experience, and for people to have their own insight and to find their own path, because it's like not me to say what you should or shouldn't do, but it's just creating that space for us on planet Earth to think about it for ourselves, or not just think with the mind, but feel with the heart, and feel with the body. Where's my limit? Where are my aspirations? Let that lead us, in the present moment, and be an anchor to return to in all situations. And I think that's the other thing, exactly, that, and this is the misperception that I see now. I had back when I was being a drummer in my little punk band, thinking like, I'm not helping anyone, I'm just having a great time drinking my beer, drumming, hit my drum. But actually, like, I was happy. I mean, I was a bit too much drinking my beer, so it wasn't a sustainable, life path for me. But I was young, and I was free, and it was full of joy and energy, and people used to come to our shows and have a great time. And I think now I can see, like, no, that is helping also, in a healthy way. Like, that's you in your element, enjoying life, and then other people getting high off that and then going out and doing their stuff that they love, and that's helping the world too. And I think that was another big insight, that when I started going to the monastery, to see that, I don't have to be some kind of social change advocate to help. I can just, like, wash a pot, mindfully and joyfully, and that's helping actually, and I enjoy it. And then, how can we then integrate that energy of joy and pleasure of being alive into maybe more difficult situations, but like you say, try to enjoy the process of just being alive, really.
Yeah, and I think all of these things, that and also bringing it to meditation, which is, I found a huge amount of benefit from a whole load of different reflective practices, and I think it's one of those things that's actually, I don't think it's terribly well taught very often. I don't think the kind of cultural ideas, certainly in the West, of what meditation is and how it works are really very helpful, and that gets in the way of people really, but thinking about it as in enjoying it, like, it's not punishment. It's not like what's the word, self flagellation or something. It's like, what that orientation to what is there to enjoy here, and that's a
flow state.
As well. Absolutely.
And we all have the capacity to enter that, I think, in our own special way as well. I think that's the other thing, that my journey with music was that I realized through meditation that I've always been meditating with sound. Like, I've always dropped out of this, thinking I've got to do this next, and then yesterday I shouldn't have done that. It's just I'm in the present moment with sound, beyond this feeling of this self, this separation, and that is meditation. And I think, again, for my work, it's not about just getting everyone into sound, and no, it's just, that's my joy, but what's yours? How can you touch into what brings you joy? It might be swimming, it might be bird watching, it might be anything, but it's just going to take you into that expansive space. And then how can you integrate that expansive space around yourself, your views, your wounds, your triggers, so that you have those choices in the present moment to act maybe differently.
I think this is, we're coming to a really interesting combination of things around this idea of what it means to support someone's self-advocacy rather than to advocate for them. And to kind of, you've talked about creating space a lot, and I think, when we're talking about that and how we look at things, and I've found this as well, even in working with myself, is rather than like, how do I fix this, it's actually just allowing myself to attend to the barrier and be like, okay, what is it's very similar to what you're saying. If the pot needs washing, you wash the pot. It's like, that is the immediate thing, so I do the immediate thing that's between me and the thing. It does require having a sense of where you want to go and what the but not, and kind of a remembering of that direction, but that's like, but also it's okay to attend to the thing right now, and okay to attend to our own needs right now, I think, is the other part of it. And that's one of the funny things, as well, when we're talking about helping ourselves or helping other people, is sometimes I think, certainly when you encounter someone who's in profound suffering, who has, for whatever reason, is really suffering, sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is make both of you a cup of tea and sit with them in silence.
Oh yeah, I think that's the best thing to do if someone's in profound suffering. I think that we suffer so much because we can't just be in it as well, and be held by someone in that loving awareness. And definitely a cup of tea always helps. That's our British cup of tea fixes anything. But you know, in Coronation Street or something like that, you're going to see someone making a cup of tea and then telling that person what to do. Oh, you should do this and that. Oh, it's not that bad. And you know, and actually it's so profound and simple, but still new, I think, to this, you know, generation, or anyway, for, you know, my understanding of human history, to just sit there and just breathe and just allow that suffering to be alive and to honor it, because it, you know, it needs to be there, it needs to be accepted, it needs to feel that it's okay to exist.
Yeah, it makes me think that there's when we say helping, you're making me think that we think that brings to mind something active.
Yes,
There's that helping implies doing something.
definitely.
Whereas hearing you say that makes me think that there is equally helping in not doing, carefully and selectively,
Yeah, to
but
know.
that you can helpfully not act.
Oh yeah, please.
And I think that is for me, that's like, it's such a reassuring idea on some level, that, you know, that we don't just have to keep doing and doing and doing and doing, and that we can kind of be with not doing. And you know, for me, often it's like we have a cultural fear of not acting. And I think
Oh
this partly relates to the blame thing, actually. It's like, if I didn't do anything, am I then to blame for what happens? Whereas
yeah,
for me, it's like, if there isn't a clear pull to do anything, actually, but helping included, then the helpful thing is not to do anything, instead of just to do random things and see what, you know. It's like, when things are
make me a cup
difficult.
of tea though.
Yeah,
Always
yeah,
tea.
always a cup of tea.
I'll take a red bush. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's
Sorry to interrupt me.
and I think there's also you know, it's about bodily comfort and pleasure, and also about, like, if I need to help and I can't quite contain that, I can direct that into something practical that does, you know, that's fine. I am acting.
Yeah.
So that part of my brain that's like, you need to do something, you need to do, is quiet, gets its way, but I'm not doing something where I'm trying to change someone else's experience and interfere with their experiencing of a situation that's probably helpful for them to be with.
Yeah. You can take it juggling or something, you know, you can just, I'll be right back. And then you just have a little
Yeah.
juggle. You know, it's true. I think, then again, this discernment, this knowing when to act, when not to act, again, has to come through awareness, yeah, of the self, of the other in this dimension where there is that separation, and of the situation. But yeah, I think it's hugely helpful to just be present, to be present. And this is also something it was hugely transformative for me when I started going on these retreats. And it was just such a weight off my shoulders to be like, well, I can just sit and listen to people's suffering and not need to fix it or do anything. And it was so powerful, because it's still, I could see that it was having a healing, transformative effect for the individual. And it's also, again, for me, we use this word empowerment a lot in advocacy, but I know myself, I wasn't always empowering my clients. I was doing for them, you know. And that's, you know, my bad, but that's something you always have to be working with. You're meant to be empowering people with the self-awareness and the tools to speak up for themselves, to create change in their lives, to access services. Ultimately, you know, maybe not the first session, but again, with this situation, one practice we do, which is called Dharma sharing, and it's just sitting in a circle and listening deeply to each other. And there's no pressure to share, but the space is there. Again, this space, this sense of space, an open, supportive, loving space. You hope, I mean, it doesn't always go to plan, but the rules are kind of set out there, that we respect each other. We won't answer back. We won't try and fix, and we won't speak about it once you leave the circle. But it's just this like holding in love listening to people's experiences of life, of their practice. And some of it's really painful. Some people straight away launching into, the worst things that have ever happened to them. But it was so beautiful to just listen to that, actually, be a witness to their suffering and breathe with it and relax in the body and notice any need to, do something, but just allow that, just let it be there, but not act, And I think over time, over many years of being part of these circles, which I still am, it's shown me that, I can be a presence, a loving presence. And that is helping. And it's not on my shoulders to fix, but yet it will support, the greater good.
I think the other thing that really comes out for me in this is this idea of when we say I need to help and essentially that I need to change things, including myself, that I am not sufficient to meet this responsibility or this, and instead actually, that through being with, just the intrinsicness of how I am and how I respond, that's helpful for some other people. I think that's a really, really important way of relating to that in ourselves, and that we model in some ways, our experiences help other people engage with things in other ways, and how if we can be with their suffering on a physical level, we actually provide them with quite a profound ways that they might do that too.
True.
We invite them to do it, and not to do it alone.
Yes.
It's a very different thing to being to fixing it, removing the source of the thing. Yes. And I think that's such a helpful, way that to not to have to do so much helping, not to be not to make yourself this kind of not to just use yourself as a tool all the time, but to be able to be with that as well. And what arises feels like a really powerful and really powerful way of true self-advocacy and advocacy for others. Because I think that's the other part of it. It's like we have to model self-advocacy to be able to support others in their self-advocacy. We can't, so we have to be able to do it for ourselves as well.
Oh yeah, and that's very much a practice for me. It's not something I find easy personally, which is why I had all these issues, because if I found it easy to do that, then perhaps they wouldn't have come about. But I think it's true, isn't it, that we often end up working in or teaching on the issues that we find that have been our greatest challenge, because actually then we have so much experience and hopefully some insight because of looking at it in different ways and asking for help ourselves, actually, and learning, growing and sharing. But it's something that I do now. I live in a kind of, we don't call it a community, we call it a collective. And I know you like words, the meaning of words, because we've all come from the kind of Plum Village tradition community, where you really are like operating as one body, because it's this kind of lived experience of interbeing, of no self. But here we are selves, because we're in the world, we're not in the monastery, but we come together, we work alongside each other, and it's this feeling of like, from independence to interdependence. And we all kind of, so we have our own work, we have our own lives, but we choose to come together to practice, just the basic stuff of sitting and walking and being together mindfully and joyfully. But it's also a great chance for me to practice self-advocacy, so to be aware of my limits when we're doing work together, because it's quite intense. We offer retreats once a month together, and it's full on. Like, I love it, but it's like you're kind of on from the second you wake up, till the second you go to bed. And we're trying to practice mindfulness together, obviously, and create that energy for others to drop into. But I realized that for me, like at the end of that, I'm so tired actually physically that I need, it's like do not disturb, airplane mode. And I have to self-advocate. I have to have the awareness of, okay, I'm getting to my limit now physically and stimulation wise. And I have to self-care. This is my process of what do I need to do? Well, I need silence. I need space. I need, to be in nature. I need to play my guitar. And then to express that to the people that I love and I collaborate with, so they know, what my limit is. And then just work. For me, this is all about co-creation, collaboration as well. And working in that way instead of like, oh, I'm just going to do it because they want me to do it. And now I'm resenting them and I'm burnt out. And how can, that for me is the mode that I see happening in myself and in the world. And I think this is a way to just to try to crack through that and actually say, no, whatever I'm feeling is okay. I can take care of it and I can express it. And then other people can understand me and be empowered to express themselves and tell me their limits or their needs or their whatever, what they want to drink, for a cup of tea.
Exactly. I love that. I think, I love that as thinking about that as first of all, the interdependence thing. I think we're, very much we're talking about moving towards a state of interdependence. And also the fact that you're practically creating that space that others can then come into, so it's part of the fabric of the situation of the place of the collective to do that, and that again provides a systemic model that people can then kind of experience.
This is it.
And then take away in whatever form they choose to.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's what we value, what we've seen from the Plum Village experience of like, it's not just like, oh, we put on a retreat and it's like a business and some people teach, other people wash up and cook. It's like, no, we live this every day together. We learn and grow together. We love each other and we are living in a level of harmony and awareness, and we're always working with that. And then people can drop into that and see the value of that, like you say, and take that away into their own lives. Hopefully that's the plan.
That's wonderful. So if people do want to find out more about you and your work and the work at the retreat, then we've got some stuff in the show notes. But do you want to say any more about that? I think we've got the link to the website, your online sessions as well. So yeah, if you've got anything specific coming up or anything you want to share.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, the next few months is going to be nice. A, because it's summer, so it's always good. But B, we've got a retreat that is something I've been helping to organise because it's close to my heart. It's called Love in Action. So it really is this kind of, how can we act from a place of love, first for ourselves, and generating that energy, and then also spreading that out through our action in the world. And within that, I'm doing a workshop which is based on this workshop I created called You Can Say No. And this is called The Sound of Self-Compassion. So it's really this process that I practice. So it's self-awareness on an issue that's taking you out of out of alignment into kind of dis-ease. So it could be any issue. It might be, I was joking, it might be the cat, is keeping you awake at night. So you've got to decide, no, if she's going to sleep in the other room. It might be a job that you don't want to do anymore, just something that's not right for you, taking you out of alignment. And then it's this process of self-care. We work with sound to meet kind of tension in the body around why we're not actually actioning that already then, because there's always a reason why we haven't said no yet, and I want to honor that. I want to bring in the whole, instead of just bulldozing through to change. And then and then we work with sound to meet that tension and draw it out. And then I'll add some bells. Can you hear them?
Yes.
Like to breathe with the bell. Yeah, and then we kind of do this responsibility thing. Actually, we look at the consequences of that choice, because we've really got to face it and face the fact that, well, we might lose a friend, or the cat might be a bit annoyed with us, for a few weeks. Can we sit in that discomfort? Can we really face it? Can we accept it? And I think that's a very empowering step. And then we make an action plan to actually do it. So, well, who are you going to speak to? When is it? And how can you do it skillfully with love? So this is a kind of model that I've been developing. So that will be part of the retreat. And I also offer it at the next one's in July. So it's online, so you can access it through one of the links. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. And before we started recording, you did also mention that you might want to end with a song. If you would like to, I would very much enjoy that. It would be a wonderful way to round off this this episode. So yeah.
Thanks, Matthew. My throat's a bit hoarse now from chatting so much about helping, but I'd love to share this song. Yeah, it's a new one. It's called "To Be a Witness," and it really is about this subject about love can be just witnessing, and the power of that. So I'll sing it for you now. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you.
My love is here to be a witness. My love is clear and that won't change. I know things are hard, and I won't pretend it's not scary. I know things are hard, but we can face the dark. It's not too early. It's not too late. My love is here to be a witness, and our love is clear, and that won't change. I know things are hard, and I won't pretend it's not scary. Ooh, I know things are hard, but we can face the dark. It's not too early. It's not too late.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for the song and for all of your insight and wisdom, and for appearing on the show. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Yeah, it's always great to hang out with you.
Definitely. And I hope that got you thinking in the audience. So if it did, please do reach out and ask and get in touch with either one of us. Thank you all for watching. It is your support that makes this possible, or at least legitimizes my excuse to talk to really interesting and wonderful people. So thank you. Please do share it with someone that you think might benefit from it. You can find upcoming and past episodes on YouTube and LinkedIn. And you can also search for the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. But if you search for Delightful Dissent, though at time of recording, the episodes are still quite out of date. I am still working on that. If you're a regular watcher or listener to the show, you'll know that I've been working on that a little while now. But it will happen, and it's in at the right time, I'm sure. The next episode is going to be with Adam Woods, who is an award-winning filmmaker and on-camera confidence coach. And we're going to be talking very appropriately about the assumption that you should put others first. And I think, it feels like very much with this line of thinking that I lose sight of my own wants and needs, which is so appropriate for this as a kind of a continuation of this conversation. And I don't think that works for anyone in the long run. So I'm really looking forward to this. And if you're also looking forward to this, you won't have to wait very long, because as this recording was delayed a little bit, that episode will be live tomorrow at 1 p.m. So Thursday, May the 12th. So I very much hope to see you then. And in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Goodbye.